Welcome, everyone. Grab a seat, get those notebooks ready, and let's jump right into today's explainer. Think of this as your ultimate masterclass on how modern European nations were literally forged from the fires of revolution and falling empires. We're going to transport ourselves back to the 19th century today, exploring the massive, sweeping changes that completely rewired the political map and, honestly, the mental world of Europe. Every single concept we cover today is absolutely vital, not just for acing your exams, but for actually understanding the borders and the conflicts that define the very world we live in right now. So, let's get into it.
Okay, here is our syllabus for today so you know exactly what to expect. We're covering 1. The dream of nation-states. 2. Spark of the French Revolution. 3. Rise of liberal nationalism. 4. The age of revolutions. 5. Unification and state power. And finally, 6. The Balkan powder keg.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the dream of nation-states.
We actually began our analysis in 1848 with an artist who dared to envision a completely different world order way before it was a reality. Now look closely at this primary source. It's by a French artist named Frédéric Souriau, and he paints this stunning utopian vision. Do you see the imagery here? You've got distinct nations, men and women from all different classes, marching in this massive, long train past the Statue of Liberty. They're all grouped together, identified by their specific flags and national costumes, and check out what they're walking on in the foreground. They are literally leaving the shattered, ruined remains of absolute monarchies in the dirt behind them. He's dreaming of a brand new world made up entirely of democratic and social republics.
Now, for your exam notes, you really need to highlight this definition, because absolutism was the giant that this new wave of nationalism was desperately trying to slay. Back in 1848, Eastern and Central Europe were still completely dominated by these autocratic monarchies. You had vastly diverse groups of people all living under a single ruler, with zero shared collective identity. The absolutist state was centralized, it was militarized, and it was highly repressive. Basically, a government with absolutely no restraints on its power.
And this quote brilliantly illustrates our core concept today, as defined by the French philosopher Ernst Renan in a famous 1882 lecture. A nation isn't just defined by a line on a map, a shared language, or a river. It's so much deeper than that. It is a shared identity forged through historical struggle. It requires a long past of endeavors, sacrifice, and devotion. Renan called it a daily plebiscite, a large-scale solidarity based on the active desire to live together. Keep this in mind as we move forward. These national identities did not just exist from time immemorial. They had to be built.
Which brings us nicely to Section 2, Spark of the French Revolution. Well, dreams of liberty are one thing, but how do they actually become concrete political movements? You must remember 1789, the year of the French Revolution. Circle this, highlight it in your notes. This event gave the world its very first clear expression of nationalism. Before this, France was a full-fledged territorial state under an absolute monarch, right? But the revolution completely changed the game. It transferred sovereignty directly from that monarch to a body of citizens. They introduced totally radical ideas for the time, like the fatherland and the citizen, which created this brand new sense of collective identity.
But, as always in history, the story gets incredibly complex. Take a look at this political cartoon showing Napoleon as a postman losing his conquered territories. As the French armies marched across Europe, they played a really fascinating dual role. Initially, in places like Holland, Switzerland, and Italy, French troops were welcomed. They were seen as harbingers of liberty, bringing administrative reforms and abolishing old feudal systems. But, that enthusiasm turned to hostility pretty quickly. Why? Well, the local population suddenly realized that this new administrative efficiency came with a really heavy price tag. Increased taxation, strict censorship, and forced conscription into the French armies, just so France could conquer the rest of Europe.
Let's turn the page to Section 3, Rise of Liberal Nationalism.
So who were the actual agents of this monumental change across Europe, and what did they really want? It wasn't just peasants with pitchforks like you see in the movies. There was a massive economic shift happening under the surface. If you compare the two main classes of the 19th century, you see a huge structural conflict. On one side, you've got the traditional landed aristocracy. They owned vast estates, often still cultivated by serfs, and they held all the old political power within these autocratic monarchies. But on the other side, the dawn of industrialization birthed a brand new commercial middle class. These were your industrialists, your businessmen, your professionals. They were educated, they leaned liberal, and they directly challenged the conservative landed aristocracy. They wanted an end to those old aristocratic privileges. And here is the crucial point for this whole section. For these businessmen and professionals, liberal nationalism wasn't just about high-minded romantic ideals of freedom. It was an absolute economic necessity. Imagine trying to run a business where every single time you cross a minor provincial border, you have to deal with a completely different currency, different customs duties, and totally different weights and measures. It was a literal nightmare for trade. So they demanded uniform laws, standardized weights, and a common national currency to allow the easy, frictionless movement of goods, people, and capital.
That economic tension sets the stage for Section 4, the Age of Revolutions.
This clash of classes and economic ideas brings us to perhaps the most turbulent era in modern European history. Get ready because things are about to explode. You're going to want to memorize this timeline, mapping out the intense sequence of events where the educated middle-class elite across Europe rose up against conservative regimes. We start with the spark in 1789. Then, we see the conservative pushback with the fall of Napoleon and the Vienna Peace settlement in 1814 and 1815. That's basically the monarchs trying to put the genie back in the bottle, but it doesn't work. By 1821, the Greek struggle for independence kicks off, and by 1848, full-blown revolutions are sweeping across the entire continent. Artisans, industrial workers, and the middle classes were all out in the streets demanding constitutional representative governments.
And we have to talk about the incredible figures driving this movement. You have the Italian revolutionary Giuseppe Mazzini, who was sent into exile as a young man simply for participating in secret societies like the Carbonari. In July 1830, the Bourbon kings in France, who had literally just been restored to power, were overthrown again. It prompted the Austrian Chancellor Metternich to issue his famous and very accurate warning, "When France sneezes, the rest of Europe catches cold." You even had larger-than-life romantic figures like the English poet Lord Byron using his immense wealth and fame to mobilize support, and he actually went to fight for Greek independence. Everywhere you looked, demands for constitutionalism were fusing tightly with demands for national unification.
Now we hit a major turning point in Section 5, Unification and State Power.
Because right after those 1848 revolutions, our story takes a fascinating and actually decidedly darker twist. The romantic, idealistic era of revolutions was coming to an end. We really have to ask ourselves a vital historical question here. How did nationalism shift from being this grassroots, democratic, and liberal movement into a heavy-handed tool for military dictatorship and empire building?
Well, as we look at the unifications of Germany and Italy in the latter half of the 19th century, the vital takeaway is this step-by-step conservative hijack. Nationalism formally broke up with democracy. Conservative elites looked around and realized, hey, we can harness these powerful nationalist sentiments not to grant freedoms to the people, but to ruthlessly expand our own state power. The army and the monarchy essentially became the chief architects of the nation. They used war and cold, calculated diplomacy to forge unified states and achieve absolute political domination over Europe.
And that grim reality leads us straight to Section 6, the Balkan powder keg.
This weaponization of national identity, shifting from a desperate demand for liberty to a greedy demand for dominance, leads us directly to our final tragic chapter today. By the late 19th century, the Balkans became the most explosive region on the planet. You had this massive area of intense geographical and ethnic variation populated by people broadly known as the Slavs. Now add the fiery spread of romantic nationalism into this mix. Then factor in the rapid disintegration of the Ottoman Empire, which had ruled that whole region for centuries. One by one, these subject nationalities aggressively declared their independence. And the final, fatal ingredient? Greedy European powers. Russia, Germany, England, Austro-Hungary, they all swooped in to manipulate the region for their own imperialist territorial aims. It created a literal powder keg.
And this brings us to 1914, the pivotal year. The spark hit the powder keg, and it finally ignited. Nationalism, which had now become so deeply intertwined with narrow imperialism and a complete, utter intolerance for rival nations, led Europe and the rest of the globe headfirst into total disaster. The outbreak of the First World War.
So as you pack up your notes for the exam, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to really analyze. We started our masterclass today with Frederick Soru's beautiful utopian dream of democratic republics marching peacefully toward liberty. So how did that dream of fraternity morph into the absolute nightmare of global mechanized war by 1914? How exactly does the pure desire for freedom transform into the ruthless desire to conquer? Study these slides, trace the evolution of these classes and ideas, and I will see you all in our next masterclass.